The movie is set in Spain, and the movie revolves around the life of Eduardo, a man eagerly waiting for his friend Igor's release from prison. Eduardo waits outside the prison, anticipating Igor's appearance. As soon as Igor steps out, Eduardo warmly greets him and introduces him to his girlfriend Vanessa. After exchanging pleasantries, Eduardo takes Igor to a car where a group of girls is waiting inside, ready to cater to Igor's every whim. They hop in their respective cars and start driving. Their destination is a massive house owned by a notorious mobster in town. As they arrive, they are welcomed warmly by their friends as Igor is a respected figure among the gangsters. The plot thickens as it is revealed that Igor had worked for the mobster before as a mule. Despite his criminal past, he is still highly regarded by his peers. The story continues as Alfonso, the leader of the drug dealer gang, welcomes Igor and Eduardo to his home. Alfonso is pleased to see Igor and immediately offers him work. He encourages him to rest in his home before he starts his new job. As Igor enters the house, he meets Said, who lives there with his drug-addicted wife. Despite the chaos surrounding him, Igor remains focused and heads to his room to rest. Once there, he places a bug under the sink, revealing a significant revelation. Igor has become a spy while in jail and is now working with the police to take down the mafia. The scene then shifts to France, where a police commander named Richard is on his way to the hospital to check on the autopsy report of an unidentified man. The hospital staff tells Richard that the killer was exceptionally violent and the victim's face was severely injured, making identification difficult. Richard informs the staff that he is still investigating the case. Returning to Spain, Eduardo's men are on their way to transport a large quantity of drugs. The scene then shows a group of thugs transporting drugs by boat to the coastline, where Eduardo's men will take over. The exchange takes place on a crowded beach, but the thugs show no concern and complete the transaction without issue. In another scene, we are introduced to Sarah, a Spanish police officer investigating a traffic accident that is suspected to be a homicide case. She works with her colleague Bob, and her boss informs them that the prime suspect has not yet been found. Later that evening, Sarah and Bob chat over drinks, and she reveals that she has been working with Igor, a spy who was recently released from prison. Sarah tasks Bob with a mission to take down the notorious drug lord and his henchmen. Bob readily accepts, pledging his full support. The following day, Igor and Eduardo rendezvous with Alfonso at his ranch, where the mafia boss offers them a job to transport a massive shipment of drugs to a fellow mafia in France. Igor accepts, and they depart after finalizing the plan. Later on, back in Igor's room, he checks the bug he had planted earlier and retrieves a SAM card he had stashed away. He then covertly uses Said's phone to send a message to Sarah, informing her of the impending drug delivery to France the next day. Sarah immediately informs her boss, who orders her to alert the rest of their team to prepare for an ambush. Returning to France, Richard and his team are still searching for the suspect in the unsolved murder case. Despite their efforts, they have yet to make any progress. Meanwhile, in Spain, Sarah is en route to a police division to request backup for the upcoming ambush. She meets with Molin, the leader of the division, and they collaborate on a detailed plan, assigning tasks to each member of the team. Back in France, we meet Bruno, the leader of a notorious gang. Over dinner at a restaurant, Bruno and his companions engage in vulgar conversation, making other diners uncomfortable. When a guest politely asks them to lower their voices, Bruno becomes defensive and confrontational, attacking the man and warning him not to cross him. Bruno and his associates then depart from the restaurant, leaving chaos in their wake. The following day, Igor sneaks a bug into one of the cars that will be transporting the drugs. This device will signal to Sarah and her team when the convoy is en route to the designated location. Prior to departure, Eduardo instructs his crew to remain vigilant and to stay together throughout the journey, cautioning them that this is the largest drug shipment they've ever attempted. When Said's wife arrives, she joins the group, which is led by Igor and another member on motorcycles, with the rest of the crew following in their respective cars. Meanwhile, in France, Richard and his team continue to investigate the same unsolved murder case. They visit an apartment complex, hoping to gather more information from the residents that could lead them to a suspect. One resident, an elderly woman, admits to monitoring the activities of her neighbors and presents photos and details of those she deems suspicious. She also identifies a resident known as Christ, who she believes to be involved with a mafia organization. The story continues as we follow the drug shipment from Spain to France. Igor has planted a bug in one of the cars, which will alert Sarah and her team when they are about to leave. Eduardo warns his friends to stay in the group, knowing that this is the biggest drug shipment they've ever done. They are joined by Said's wife, who is taking drugs and becomes unconscious on the way. Said's wife becomes sick, and he becomes anxious about her. He decides to leave the group and pull over his car to check on her. When Spanish police arrive, Said panics and opens fire, prompting Eduardo to shoot the police. The next scene reveals Eduardo on a call with Christ, confirming their arrival in France to deliver drugs to Bruno. Meanwhile, Said is struggling with his wife's addiction and falls into a panic when she loses consciousness due to an overdose. As he tries to revive her, Spanish cops approach them, suspecting suspicious activity, and Said opens fire on them. Eduardo arrives and helps take down the cops before reprimanding Said for leaving the group. Unfortunately, Said's wife is found dead due to the gunfire. Eduardo orders Said to leave her corpse and move on. He informs the team to change their route, as it is too late to cross the border. Sarah and her team are waiting for the mafia group but are forced to evacuate due to the gunfight near the border. They arrive at the crime scene to find the victims brutally murdered, realizing that the mafia group is not only dangerous but ruthless. Eduardo's group takes a break in a nearby village, and Eduardo forces an old man to let them stay the night despite the man's initial reluctance. The old man reluctantly allowed Eduardo and his gang to stay at his house to protect his family and son from harm. He hosted them for dinner, where Eduardo gave some advice to the old man's son. Later, the old man secretly inspected the gang's cars and realized they were criminals. Eduardo discovered the old man's actions and killed him. He then ordered his accomplice Igor to bring the old man's wife and son outside and kill them to eliminate any witnesses. While they carried out this gruesome act, Eduardo and his lover, Vanessa, indulged in explicit lovemaking upstairs. The scene travels back to France, where Richard, a seasoned police officer, receives news from his colleague about a new mission. A notorious mafia gang from Spain is planning to carry out a drug deal in France, and Richard and his team have been tasked to intercept them. Richard swiftly takes charge of the situation and instructs his team to collaborate with the Spanish police force to plan a joint operation to capture the gang members. That evening, they meet with the Spanish police led by Sarah, who briefs them on the heinous crimes committed by the mafia group. As the team strategize and assign tasks, Richard takes a moment to call his daughter, reminding her of his love and promising to be back soon. Sarah joins Richard later, and they share a friendly conversation. The next day, the mafia group sets off on their mission. Said takes charge of driving an old man's car, while Bruno heads out to collect drugs from a designated location. Christ accompanies Eduardo, who is responsible for the drug deal. As Christ settles into his car, an old lady from his apartment complex spots him through her window. Meanwhile, Eduardo, Igor, and the rest of the team take a quick break and call Sarah to inform her that they are almost at the designated location. With this information, Sarah quickly mobilizes her team, determined to apprehend the mafia members and bring them to justice. The police officers give it their all, working tirelessly to ensure that the mission is successful. The designated location happens to be a popular tourist attraction in France, and after a long wait, the mafia members begin to arrive one by one, ready to conduct their drug transaction. However, just as the transaction is about to begin, a bus full of students arrives at the scene, seemingly out of nowhere. It becomes clear that this was all part of the mafia's plan to avoid detection by the police. Despite the unexpected setback, the transfer of drugs from Eduardo to Bruno goes smoothly, and the mafia members are ready to leave the site. At this point, the police officers make their move, launching a surprise attack on the mafia members. Surprisingly, the mafia members do not put up a fight and instead calmly surrender to the authorities. As the story goes, amidst an ambush by the police, 2 cars and 2 bikes tried to escape, including Igor's bike. After a long chase, the police managed to catch one of the cars, but Saeed driving the other car and Igor on his bike were able to evade the cops. The captured mafias were taken to the police station while Igor, Saeed, and some other mafia members pulled up somewhere else to argue and blame each other for their failed mission. As they were bickering, Saeed received a call from Christ, who informed him that there was a spy among them who betrayed their location to the police. Saeed revealed the spy's identity to Igor and attempted to shoot him, but ended up missing his target. Igor breathed a sigh of relief, having successfully covered up his betrayal. Meanwhile, at the police station, Sarah was interrogating Eduardo, demanding to know who his boss was. However, instead of answering her question, Eduardo made a lewd suggestion to her. Mullen, who was present, promptly punched him for his inappropriate behavior. In another part of the station, Vanessa asked for a cigarette and propositioned Richard, asking him to sleep with her inside her cell. However, Richard declined, stating that she wasn't his type. After interrogating Eduardo, Sarah faced Bruno, who issued threats and insults, calling her a bitch and questioning her ability as a cop. Furious at Bruno's words, Richard landed a punch on him. Sarah and Richard then took a moment outside, where they shared personal details about their lives and found themselves attracted to each other. Their brief respite was interrupted by a call from Sarah's partner, who informed her that they had found the location of drug boss Alfonso. The cops successfully ambushed the house and took down all of Alfonso's men. However, when 2 cops finally caught Alfonso, he shot them dead, and the situation spiraled out of control. Alfonso had been posing as a cop and tried to make a getaway while disguised in a police uniform, but his cover was blown and he was caught by the cops. Despite the cops' orders to surrender, Alfonso tried to resist, and the situation ended in a shootout that claimed Alfonso's life. In the next scene, the French and Spanish police were transferring the mafia members to a high-security prison when they encountered a highway accident that caused a traffic jam. As they waited, one of the mafia members, Vanessa, requested to go outside to pee, but instead used it as a code to signal an attack on the cops. The mafia successfully ambushed the cops, killing Vanessa and several officers, while Eduardo managed to escape. Later, a lawyer approached Sarah, warning her about the mistake of arresting someone like Bruno, but Sarah fearlessly stood up to him. At the police station, a key witness came forward, revealing that Eduardo and his men were responsible for the deaths of the old man's wife and son. Meanwhile, Eduardo watched the news and saw footage of the old man's family, realizing that Igor had betrayed him by sparing their lives. This made Eduardo furious, as he had considered Igor to be a spy. Meanwhile, Richard and Sarah spend the night together after Richard walks her home. As the story progresses, a couple of cops discover the mafia's bikes and cars and inform Richard, who is spending the night with Sarah. Richard realizes that he needs to leave and take action. In Christ's house, Eduardo confronts Igor, who betrayed him. Despite being questioned, Igor admits that he is tired of living a life of crime. In a fit of rage, Eduardo kills him without a word. However, their showdown is cut short when the police arrive, fully armed and ready to apprehend Eduardo and his men. The ensuing gunfight is intense, but the cops manage to break into the house and find Igor dead in his cell. Sarah, who was devastated by his death, watches as the bad guys are overwhelmed and captured. Despite being handcuffed, Eduardo insults Sarah by calling her a stupid cop. Enraged, Sarah points her gun at him, ready to pull the trigger, but her teammate stops her and takes over. As the cops evacuate the victims of the shooting, including Igor's lifeless body, a new day dawns. Sarah is seen walking down the alley, carrying a bucket of flowers to meet Richard. However, her heart sinks when she sees him outside with his daughter and ex-wife. Though she's sad that she can't be with him, she feels happy for him and his family's reunion. The moral of the story is that it's important to do what's right, even if it means going against the people you used to work with.